Have you ever been blindsided at work? Ever walked into a normal day and left feeling like everything you built disappeared in seconds? If that's happened to you, share your experience in the comments. And if you believe people deserve fairness at work, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let me tell you what happened to me. My name is Laura Bennett, and the day I was fired started like any other Tuesday. I walked into the office balancing my coffee and laptop, already running through my to-do list in my head. Deadlines, calls, reports, the usual chaos. But the moment I stepped onto the floor, something felt off. Conversations stopped too quickly. People avoided eye contact. Even the energy felt different, like I had walked into a room where something had just happened. I brushed it off and headed to my desk. 10 minutes later, an email popped up from my manager. Subject line, team meeting, conference room A. Now. No context. No agenda. I grabbed my notebook and walked in, expecting another rushed discussion about targets. Everyone was already seated. Too quiet. Too still. My manager stood at the front, hands clasped, not smiling. Then he looked directly at me. "Laura, could you stand for a moment?" I felt my stomach tighten, but I stood anyway, thinking maybe I was about to be recognized for the project I'd carried for weeks. Instead, his expression hardened. And in that moment, I realized something was very, very wrong. I stayed standing, waiting for the recognition I thought was coming. My heart was beating a little faster, but I forced a small smile anyway. Maybe this was about the project I'd spent nights finishing. Maybe it was a thank you. Maybe it was a promotion. Instead, my manager cleared his throat and looked down at a folder in his hands. "Laura, over the past few weeks, we've noticed a decline in your performance," he said, his voice calm and distant, like he was reading from a script. The words didn't make sense at first. Decline? He continued, listing off missed expectations, communication failures, and costly errors. Each phrase landed harder than the last. I opened my mouth to respond, but he didn't pause long enough for me to speak. I don't understand," I finally said. "What errors? Can you be specific?" The room stayed silent. No one looked at me. He didn't answer my question. Instead, he closed the folder and said, "After careful consideration, we've decided to terminate your employment. Effective immediately." The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. I stood there, frozen, waiting for someone to laugh, to explain, to say this was some kind of misunderstanding. But no one moved. No one spoke. Then I noticed something that made my chest tighten even more. 2 security staff were standing quietly near the door. And suddenly, I realized this wasn't a conversation. It had been planned. The rest happened faster than I could process. One of the security guards stepped forward and gently asked for my badge. My hands were shaking as I unclipped it and placed it in his palm. Just like that, years of work, late nights, and loyalty were reduced to a small piece of plastic being taken away. "I just need to collect my things," I said, my voice barely steady. My manager nodded without meeting my eyes. I walked back to my desk with security a few steps behind me. Every footstep felt heavy, like the entire office was watching. I could feel it, the silence, the tension, the discomfort. But when I looked up, people quickly turned back to their screens. No one said goodbye. No one asked what happened. Except one person. As I packed my notebook and a few personal items into my bag, I glanced across the room and caught Daniel from accounting staring at me. His expression wasn't cold or distant like everyone else's. He looked guilty. When our eyes met, he quickly looked down, like he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. That stayed with me. Outside, the sunlight felt too bright, too normal. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a company-wide email notification. And when I opened it, my stomach dropped. The subject line read, "Staff update." I opened the company email with a strange sense of dread crawling up my spine. My name was right there in the first line. "We regret to inform you that Laura Bennett is no longer with the company due to performance-related issues tied to recent project failures." I read it twice. Then a third time. Performance-related issues. Project failures. My hands went cold. They didn't just fire me, they announced it. Publicly. To everyone. Vendors, departments, clients. Anyone on the internal list would see it. My chest tightened as I kept reading. The email went on to mention costly oversights and a breakdown in accountability. It sounded official. Final. Carefully worded. And completely untrue. I sat there in my car stunned, replaying the last few months in my head. I hadn't missed deadlines. I hadn't ignored warnings. If anything, I'd been the one constantly raising concerns, pushing for fixes, staying late to make sure things didn't fall apart. So how could they pin a failed project on me? Then something hit me. 2 weeks before everything collapsed, I had been quietly removed from several parts of that project. Meetings I used to lead were suddenly reassigned. Reports I usually reviewed were sent through someone else first. At the time, I assumed it was just restructuring. Now it felt like something else. Like I'd been moved out of the way. I scrolled back through old calendar notifications, my pulse starting to quicken. Because the timing didn't feel random anymore. It felt planned. And the more I thought about it, the more one terrifying question started to form. Had they already decided to blame me long before that meeting? I drove home in silence, the email still open on my phone like something I couldn't stop staring at. Once inside, I dropped my bag on the floor and went straight to my laptop. I needed proof. Something that told me I wasn't imagining things. I logged into my personal email, the one I used to back up important work conversations and notes. My hands were shaking as I searched for the project name. Dozens of threads popped up. I started opening them one by one. There they were, my warnings. Weeks before the project went wrong, I had flagged delays, budget gaps, and missing approvals. I had sent detailed breakdowns, highlighted risks, even suggested alternative plans. And every time, someone higher up had replied with the same response. Proceed as discussed. Noted. Let's stay on course. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. They knew. They knew there were problems and pushed forward anyway. Then I found something that made my stomach drop. An email from 3 weeks ago. A short message from leadership announcing a temporary shift in responsibilities. My role in the project had been reduced. Certain decisions were being handled elsewhere. No explanation. No meeting. Just a quiet change. At the time, I thought it meant less pressure. Now it felt like the moment everything turned. Because just days after that message, the project began to fall apart. And I wasn't even in the room when the final decisions were made. By early evening, the shock had started to settle into something heavier, confusion mixed with anger. I kept thinking about Daniel's face when I packed my things. That look hadn't been neutral. It wasn't sympathy either. It was guilt. I picked up my phone and stared at his contact for a long moment before calling. The line rang longer than usual. Just as I thought it would go to voicemail, he answered. Laura. His voice sounded tight. Daniel, I just need to understand what happened, I said, trying to keep my tone steady. This project they're blaming me for. I wasn't even leading it at the end. You know that, right? There was a pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end. I don't think I should be talking about this, he said quietly. My chest tightened. Daniel, please. I was fired in front of everyone. They told the whole company it was my fault. I deserve to know the truth. Another silence. Then, in a low voice, he said, things changed fast at the top. Meetings started happening without most of us. Numbers weren't adding up. What numbers? I pressed. I can't get involved, he said quickly. I'm sorry. Before I could ask another question, he added something that made my heart drop. Just, be careful, Laura. There's more going on than you think. And then he hung up. I stared at my phone, my mind racing. More going on? What could possibly be worse than what had already happened? I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that meeting again. My name, the accusations, the silence. It all replayed like a loop I couldn't turn off. Around midnight, I gave up and opened my laptop again. If there really was more going on, I needed to find it. I started digging through every saved email, report, and document I had backed up over the past year. My system was always organized folders by project, by date, by client. At the time, it was just part of staying efficient. Now it felt like my only defense. As I reviewed old messages tied to the failed project, something started to stand out. A pattern. Every time I raised a concern, it was acknowledged, then ignored. I had pointed out a supplier delay that could push deadlines. No response. I flagged a budget overrun that needed approval. We'll handle it later. I warned that rushing the final phase without testing could cause major issues. Silence. I leaned closer to the screen, heart thudding. The warnings weren't vague. They were detailed. Clear. Time-stamped. Anyone reading them would know I had seen the problems coming. Which meant one thing. If leadership claimed I caused the failure, they either hadn't read my emails, or they had and chose to bury them. The next morning felt unreal. I woke up early out of habit, my body still stuck in a routine that no longer existed. For a few seconds, I forgot what had happened. Then it hit me all over again. I didn't have a job. I forced myself to move anyway. I updated my resume, polished my portfolio, and started applying to positions. I told myself I couldn't fall apart. I needed to stay focused, stay practical. By midday, a recruiter responded faster than I expected. We spoke over the phone, and at first, everything seemed promising. She liked my experience. She was impressed with the projects I'd led. Her tone was warm, encouraging. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. So, can you tell me why you left your last role? My throat tightened. There were some internal changes, I said carefully. A restructuring, and I ended up being let go. There was a brief pause. I see, she said, her voice shifting slightly. We were informed there were performance concerns tied to a recent project? My heart dropped into my stomach. Informed by who? I asked before I could stop myself. Another pause. Well, your former company provided a general reference update. I felt heat rise in my chest. They weren't just blaming me internally. They were telling the outside world too. As we ended the call, I knew that email from yesterday wasn't just damage control. It was a narrative. And it was already spreading. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop open but untouched. I couldn't focus on applications anymore. My mind kept circling back to what the recruiter said. A reference update. They were actively shaping the story. My phone buzzed suddenly against the table, breaking the silence. I glanced down, expecting another rejection or spam message. Instead, it was an email. No subject line. No name. Just a blank sender address and one attachment. My pulse immediately quickened. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, unsure if I should open it. It could be anything. A mistake. A virus. A cruel joke. But something about the timing felt too precise. Slowly, I tapped the message open. There was no text inside. Just a single file attached. The file name made my breath catch. It was the name of the exact project I had been fired over. My hands hovered over the screen. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. Someone had sent me something on purpose. Someone who knew what happened. And as I finally downloaded the file, one thought kept repeating in my mind. Whoever this was, they knew I hadn't been told the full truth. I stared at the attachment for a full minute before opening it. My finger hovered over the screen, my heart pounding like I was about to unlock something dangerous. Finally, I tapped it. A document opened. It was a detailed internal timeline of the project, dates, decisions, approvals, revisions. My eyes scanned quickly, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't something I had ever received while working there. This was deeper. Internal. Restricted. I leaned forward, reading more carefully. The timeline showed when the first problem started, when budgets shifted, when deadlines were moved. But what caught my attention immediately was where my name appeared. Or rather, where it didn't. I was listed in the early stages as project lead. Then, halfway through, my name slowly stopped appearing in key decision points. Approval lines were signed by other people. Final calls were made in meetings I wasn't part of. My chest tightened. According to this document, I hadn't even been present when the biggest risks were approved. I kept scrolling, my pulse racing faster. The final stage, the one they claimed I ruined, was signed off by someone else entirely. An executive. I sat back stunned. This timeline didn't match the story they told at all. It quietly showed that the project had changed hands long before it failed, which meant the question wasn't just why I was fired anymore. It was why they said I caused something I wasn't even controlling. I opened the next attachment in the folder, my hands trembling slightly. This one was a performance report. My name was at the top, along with dates covering the past year. I frowned, confused. This wasn't the version I had seen during my last review. I began reading. Line after line praised my work. Strong leadership. Consistent results. Dependable under pressure. There were notes about how I handled difficult clients, how I stabilized projects that were falling apart, how I exceeded expectations. I felt a strange mix of relief and anger rise in my chest. This was the truth. This was the record of how I actually performed. And it didn't stop there. The most recent evaluation was dated just 2 weeks before I was fired. It described me as one of the most reliable team members and mentioned potential for future leadership. My throat tightened. 2 weeks. 2 weeks before they stood me in front of everyone and claimed I was failing. I kept reading until I reached the final page. That's where something felt off. The positive notes stopped abruptly. There was a blank section where the next update should have been. And at the bottom, a small internal comment was left behind, almost like it wasn't meant to be seen. Hold on further reviews until situation stabilizes. Situation? What situation were they talking about? And why did it start right before everything fell apart? I kept staring at that comment at the bottom of the report. Hold on further reviews until situation stabilizes. It didn't make sense. No one had mentioned any kind of internal issue. There had been pressure, yes. Tight deadlines. Budget tension. But nothing that would justify freezing performance reviews, especially not for someone they now claimed was underperforming. I checked the date again. It was written the same week I was quietly removed from key decisions on the project. My stomach tightened. I went back to the timeline document and started comparing dates. The moment my responsibilities shifted, the moment the private meetings began, the moment this mysterious situation started, they all lined up. Within a few days of that note, I had stopped being invited to strategy calls. Approval emails no longer included me. Updates came secondhand instead of directly. At the time, I assumed they were just trying to reduce my workload. Now it felt more deliberate. Like they were slowly pushing me out of the center of everything. I scrolled deeper into the files, looking for anything else connected to that week. That's when I found another document. It was a meeting summary. The title was vague, but the attendee list made my chest tighten. Senior leadership. Finance. Legal. No department managers. No team leads. And definitely no me. I opened it, my pulse racing. The notes were short. Careful. Vague. But one line stood out immediately. Staff adjustments may be required if losses continue. Losses? What losses were they talking about? My hands were shaking now as I searched the rest of the folder. Whoever sent these files didn't just give me one document. There were layers. And each one seemed to answer a question while creating 2 more. Then another email notification popped up. From the same blank address. This time, there was a short message. Just one sentence. You were chosen. My heart started pounding. Chosen? Chosen for what? I immediately replied, my fingers moving fast across the screen. Who is this? What do you mean I was chosen? Please tell me what's going on. I hit send and waited. The message didn't bounce back like before. But there was no reply either. I went back to the documents, rereading that meeting summary. Leadership. Finance. Legal. Losses. Staff adjustments. It didn't sound like a performance issue. It sounded like a crisis. And then something else clicked. If the company was losing money, if leadership was panicking, if legal was already involved, then maybe my firing wasn't just about one failed project. Maybe they needed someone to take the fall. I stared at the words, "You were chosen," again, my chest tightening. Because if that was true, then this had started long before the meeting where they stood me up and took everything away. I went back to the timeline document and started reading it more slowly, forcing myself to focus on every name, every date, every approval. Before, I had been searching for my own role in the collapse. Now I was looking for something else, the point where everything shifted. Halfway through the project timeline, there was a section marked Executive Oversight added. That hadn't meant much at the time. Leadership occasionally stepped in on large accounts. It wasn't unusual. But as I read further, I realized something I had completely missed. From that moment on, every major decision, budget approvals, timeline changes, supplier adjustments, was signed off by one specific executive. The same name appeared over and over again. Final approval. Final authority. And my name stopped appearing right around then. I leaned back, thinking hard. I remembered the first time that executive joined one of our calls. Everyone had been tense, careful with their words. After that, things started changing fast. Deadlines shortened. Costs were pushed lower. Concerns were brushed aside. I had raised questions back then, and I had been told, gently but firmly, to trust the new direction. I opened my old calendar history and searched that executive's name. Dozens of meetings appeared. But then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Several of those meetings were marked private, and I wasn't invited. I clicked into one of the private meeting entries, hoping to find notes or a summary. Nothing. Just the title, the date, and a list of attendees. All senior leadership. My name wasn't anywhere near it. I opened another one. Same thing. Then another. Over the span of 3 weeks, there were multiple meetings tied directly to the project, all marked private, all involving top executives, and all happening right after major problems were reported. And I had no idea any of them existed. I scrolled further down and noticed something else. One meeting had originally included me. My breath caught. My name was there in faint gray text, crossed out and replaced by someone else from upper management. No explanation. No message. Just quietly removed. I sat back slowly, trying to make sense of it. That meeting happened 2 days before the project's final phase was approved. The same phase they later claimed I mishandled. But I wasn't there. I wasn't part of the discussion. I wasn't part of the decision. And yet, somehow, I was the one blamed for what happened after. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. Because if they had removed me from the room right before the most critical moment, then they knew exactly what was coming. And they made sure I wouldn't be there to stop it. I kept digging through my old calendar, scrolling back week by week, trying to understand how much I had actually been cut out of. At first, the changes were small. A meeting moved. A discussion rescheduled. A quick update handled by someone else. I barely noticed at the time because I trusted the process. But now, looking at it all together, it felt different. There was a clear pattern. The more problems the project faced, the less I was included. I started writing down dates on a notepad beside me. The first warning I sent about supplier delays. The week budgets started shifting. The moment I was removed from decision calls. The day the private executive meetings began. Each point lined up perfectly. Then I found something that made my pulse spike. A meeting labeled Damage Control Strategy. I had never seen that before. I clicked it open, but the details were restricted. No notes. No attachments. Just the time, the date, and the attendees. Finance. Legal. Executive leadership. And it took place 3 days before I was fired. I sat back, staring at the screen. Damage control for what? The project hadn't officially failed yet at that point. So what exactly were they preparing for? And why did it feel like they already knew something was about to go very, very wrong? My phone rang late that night, the sudden sound making me jump. I glanced at the screen and saw a name I hadn't expected. Maya from operations. We weren't close, but we had worked together for years. I answered quickly. Hello. Her voice was low and tense announced. Laura. I shouldn't be calling you. My chest tightened. Then why are you? There was a long pause. Because what happened to you didn't feel right, she said quietly. And people are talking. I sat up straighter. Talking about what? After you left that day, leadership pulled everyone into a quick meeting, she said. They told us not to discuss the project outside the company. Not with clients. Not even internally unless it was approved. That didn't sound normal. They said it was to control confusion, she continued. But it didn't feel like that. What did it feel like? I asked. Another pause. Like they were trying to protect someone. My grip tightened on the phone. Protect who? I whispered. I don't know, she admitted. But everyone was scared. And Laura, the project numbers were worse than they told us. Worse? Before I could ask more, she added quickly, I have to go. I just thought you deserved to know. And then the line went dead. After the call ended, I sat there staring at my phone, my mind racing faster than it had all week. Worse than they told us. The words kept echoing in my head, refusing to settle. I went back to my laptop and pulled up my old project notes. I had a habit of writing everything down, small details, concerns, reminders. At the time, it was just a way to stay organized. Now it felt like I was piecing together a timeline no one else wanted to see. I opened the file from the early planning phase and started reading. There it was. Weeks before the problem started, I had written a detailed warning about supplier instability. I had noted that if delays continued, we could miss key deadlines and trigger penalties. I even estimated how much those penalties might cost. I kept scrolling. Another entry. This one about a rushed budget approval that didn't leave room for unexpected changes. I had written that if anything went wrong, we wouldn't have enough financial cushion. My chest tightened. Everything I warned about had happened. Not just once. Repeatedly. I sat back slowly, staring at the screen. If leadership had read these notes, and I knew they had, because I'd shared them, then they knew exactly what was coming. Which meant the failure wasn't a surprise. It was something they saw building. And instead of stopping it, they let it happen. Just as I closed the file, another notification appeared. A new message from the same anonymous address. My pulse immediately spiked. This time, there was a short line of text above the attachment. Look at the conversation they didn't want you to see. I opened the file without hesitation. Screenshots filled the screen, internal chat logs. Timestamped. Real. Conversations between executives and senior leadership. I recognized the names instantly. I started reading. At first, the messages were tense but normal. Concerns about deadlines. Budget pressure. Client expectations. Then the tone shifted. One executive wrote, "If this goes public, we need a clear explanation." Another replied, "We'll handle messaging internally first." I scrolled down further, my heart pounding harder. And then I saw the message that made my stomach drop. "We need one person clearly responsible." A few seconds later, another reply appeared. Someone visible. Someone tied closely to the project. I felt a chill run through me as I kept reading. Then, finally, I saw it. My name. Right there in the conversation. Followed by a simple response. "She's the safest option." I stared at the screen, reading that line over and over again. She's the safest option. My hands went cold. My heart felt like it was beating in my throat. I kept scrolling through the chat, my eyes scanning every word like I was trying to make sense of something I didn't want to believe. Someone replied seconds later. "She's reliable. People trust her." Another message followed. "She won't cause a scene." I felt something shift inside my chest. They weren't talking about performance. They were talking about strategy. I kept reading. "If we move quickly, we can control the narrative. We'll need to limit who has access to the internal numbers." Then a final message appeared beneath it all. "Once the project closes, we make the change." I leaned back slowly, my entire body tense. The date on those messages was 3 weeks before I was fired. 3 weeks before the public meeting. 3 weeks before that company-wide email. That meant they had already decided. Before the project officially collapsed. Before any final reports were written. Before I even knew anything was wrong. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't just chosen. I was selected in advance. Carefully. Quietly. And they had been preparing to remove me long before I ever stood in that room. Anger replaced the shock. I opened a fresh document and started organizing everything I had found. Emails. Reports. Timelines. Screenshots. I began writing down the order of events, matching dates and decisions, building something that felt like a map of what really happened. The more I worked, the clearer it became. They had reduced my role weeks before the failure. They had removed me from meetings where final decisions were made. They had controlled what information I saw. And then they publicly blamed me for the outcome. My chest tightened as the full weight of it settled in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. I went back to the chat logs, searching for anything else that explained why. And that's when I found another section I hadn't noticed before. A discussion about numbers. Not deadlines. Not performance. Money. Large amounts. One message read, "We can't let the full loss surface yet." Another replied, "Finance is still calculating the total impact." I leaned closer to the screen, my heart starting to race again. Loss? How much money were they talking about? Then I found the line that made my stomach drop. "It's far worse than projected." I kept reading the chat logs, searching for anything that explained just how bad the situation really was. The conversation about the financial loss was scattered across multiple days, buried between updates and decisions. But when I pulled the numbers together, the picture started to form. I opened a blank spreadsheet and began copying every figure I could find. Budget increases. Emergency supplier costs. Penalty estimates. Late fees. Refund discussions. Each number alone looked manageable. Together, they were terrifying. My chest tightened as the total kept climbing. This wasn't just a failed project. This was millions. And they had known it was getting worse in real time. The messages showed growing panic from leadership, careful wording about what could be shared, and constant reminders to keep details restricted. I sat back, staring at the final estimate I had calculated. No wonder they needed someone to blame. This wasn't a small internal mistake they could quietly fix. This was the kind of loss that could shake confidence, damage reputations, maybe even cost people their jobs at the top. I scrolled further down into the messages, looking for anything else. That's when I found something that made my stomach drop. A reference to an earlier report. One message read, "This started long before her involvement." Her. Me. I opened the attachment connected to that message, my hands trembling. Because if the problems began before I was even part of the project, then everything I thought I knew was about to change. The document that opened was older than anything else I'd seen so far. Much older. I checked the date twice to make sure I wasn't reading it wrong. It was created months before I was even assigned to the project. I leaned forward, my pulse starting to race. This was an internal risk assessment. Detailed. Careful. Honest. It listed early warning signs, unstable partnerships, cost projections that didn't make sense, and a timeline that already looked too aggressive. And right there in the summary section was a sentence that made my chest tighten. Project viability uncertain without significant restructuring. They knew from the beginning. I kept reading, my hands cold. The report recommended delaying the launch, reworking contracts, slowing everything down to avoid major financial exposure. But in the notes at the bottom, there was a short response from senior leadership. Proceed as planned. No explanation. No adjustments. Just a decision to move forward anyway. I sat back stunned. The problems didn't start with me. They didn't even start a few weeks before the collapse. They were there from the very beginning. And suddenly, something else clicked in my mind. I checked the date I was officially assigned to lead the project. It was right after that report was written. I stared at the two dates on my screen, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. The risk report warning that the project might fail, and the date I was assigned to lead it. They were days apart. Not weeks. Not months. Days. A slow, heavy realization settled over me. They hadn't brought me in to build something strong. They brought me in right after they knew it was already unstable. I opened my old hiring emails and read through them again. I remembered how urgent everything felt back then. The excitement. The pressure. The way leadership kept saying they needed someone dependable to take charge immediately. At the time, I thought they believed in me. Now it felt different. It felt like they needed someone new. Someone credible. Someone with a strong track record who could step in and reassure everyone that the project was in good hands. I kept comparing timelines, matching every major decision with my arrival. Every step lined up too perfectly. The early warning signs. The decision to push forward anyway. Then suddenly, they hired me and placed me right at the center of it all. And months later, when everything finally collapsed, I was the face attached to the failure. I leaned back, heart pounding. I hadn't just been chosen at the end. I had been positioned from the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the table, surrounded by notes, emails, screenshots, and timelines, staring at the full picture I had built piece by piece. The truth felt bigger than just my firing now. It reached further back than I ever imagined. But there was still one question that hadn't been answered. Who sent me all of this? Just before sunrise, my laptop chimed. Another message from the anonymous address. This time, there was no attachment. Just a short note. I approved the early projections. I warned them. They ignored it. When it failed, they needed distance. You were never the problem. I'm sorry. My breath caught. I read the message again, slower this time. The person who sent me the files wasn't just a witness. They were the executive whose name kept appearing on those approval lines. The one who signed off on the final decisions. The one who had tried to warn leadership at the very beginning. And when the losses grew too large, they were pushed aside too. I closed my laptop slowly, the weight of everything settling in. The public firing that humiliated me wasn't the end of my career. It was the moment they tried to bury the truth. But now I had the timeline, the warnings, the proof. And for the first time since that meeting, I didn't feel powerless anymore. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.